We're back at the Yellow Penguin. What I'm going to hopefully do in this video is get some cables lubricated. Our throttle cable right here is very sluggish and very slow to return to idle, so I'm going to lubricate that. And the clutch cable is also very stiff, so I'm going to lubricate that. So I've assembled a few things here. I'm taking something apart, so I've got a bag, loose parts in. I've got some just straight 30 motor oil I'm going to use to lubricate the cables. You can use a lighter oil. I've heard someone suggest the two-stroke oil, the oil you mix with the fuel, to use as cables. It's thin, so it should flow down the cables pretty well. And I've got some wire ties here. You can also use some wire bag ties or some electrical tape. And I've just got a piece of aluminum here that was in the corner of the garage just to sit across the opening in the engine compartment. I'm going to tie the cables up. And then I've got some Play-Doh here, and I'm hoping to use that to make some funnels to go on the end of the cables. So I've already loosened the lock nuts on this clutch cable, and this clutch cable is probably a little different from clutch cable on your machine. It's different than any other one of any other of my machines. So I've got the adjusters backed off as far as they'll go. Now there's a spacer here. That is correct for these machines. And what we want to do, the cable comes through to the lever here, and there's the end of the cable is here. So we want to loosen the cable off so we can get the end of the cable out there. Now it's backed off as far as it'll go. So I'm going to pull on the cable and take this spacer off here. There's the spacer off. So that should let the cable go to the right far enough. And I'm going to put this spacer in our bag. That doesn't get lost. So the cable should go far enough ahead that we can get the end of it here. It's pushed out of the lever, and then through the lever, then I release the end from the lever by pushing it backwards. Now I can pull the cable out. There's a sleeve that came off of it. There's another spacer that was on it. I'll put that in our bag too. So the idea is to tie the cable so the end of it's up, then make a plasticine funnel on the end of it, and then put some oil in the funnel and just let the cable sit. Sorry. Camera's under the right angle. So we're going to tie the cable as upright as we can, make a funnel of plasticine around the end of the cable, and put some oil in it, and just let the cable sit and let the oil work its way down the cable. So that's one cable out where we can get at it. We'll take this other cable out before we tie them up and put the Play-Doh funnels on them. I've also heard plasticine can be used for those, but all I could find was Play-Doh, so I'm going to try that. Anyway, so to remove the throttle cable, we have to loosen the top ring, and that should just be hand and tight. And once it's free, we should be able to pull the top disc with the throttle slide and the choke slide out. And then I want to take the throttle cable out of the top disc so I can suspend it by itself. So the throttle cable goes through this spring, and here's the end of the throttle cable here. So if we hold the cable and push, the end of the cable has come out of the throttle slide. So the end of it's there. When we push it out, if we push it over so it can come through this larger hole, the cable should come out, And all the time we're doing this, we want to be careful we don't bend this needle. So we push that over, and the cable should come out. There. So there's the throttle slide. There's the spring. Again, into our bag and in where it can't fall. And I'm just going to turn the adjuster. The lock nut wasn't on it. I'm just going to turn the adjuster to take the cable out of the top disc. And now I'm just going to put the disc and the ring back in the carburetor just so they're out of the way. And just a note, the top disc has a tab on it, a little tongue that fits in the groove on the top of the carburetor. So when you're putting this back in, it should sit like that. The ring should go back on. That's just out of the way now. I'm just going to adjust the camera here because I think I had it a little low. Okay, so there's my little crossbar to hold things up with. So we'll take the cable. Actually, the cable's got a kink in it here. I'm going to straighten that out on here. And I want to tie that cable up. And I want to tie it as upright as possible. So, which way can we put the wire tie so that it holds the cable upright? Just want to hold that right. And actually, I probably going to hold it with the adjuster up out of the way. Oh, okay. There's a wrong angle. Okay, so there's the cable more or less tied on. Probably going to tie this adjuster up out of the way. Actually, I'm going to do that right now, which means I need another wire tie. That stay up out of the way there. I'll get another wire tie. And we'll tie the clutch cable up. I actually haven't used this method before, but I can't see why it wouldn't work. The only thing the only question is, I guess, is the Play-Doh going to stand up to the oil? So we'll try not to lose the Play-Doh, and you don't have to use the green Play-Doh. You can use whatever color you like. And this was Play-Doh I bought specifically for this. I didn't raid anybody's toy box for it. So we'll see how this works here. So we want to surround the cable and make a spot for the oil to sit in. That looks like it might work. We might get some leakage here because the Play-Doh isn't as rubbery as plasticine. And there are cable oilers available, but I thought I'd try this. Cable oilers are available for motorcycle cables and probably bicycle cables. Yeah, that's more of a flower than a funnel. Okay, so I'm going to put some oil a little bit in and see what happens. It runs right out or not, and this is just 30 weight oil. 10W30 would work, or 5W30, or 3-in-1 would be a little thinner and would flow better. It's a little cool out here today, so here's a little better look at the funnels, for lack of a better word, that I made with the Play-Doh. And the one on the throttle cable, the oil is going somewhere, so hopefully that means it's going down the cable. The oil on the clutch cable doesn't seem to be moving as quickly, so we'll just have to let this sit and see what happens. We'll let it sit for a while. I'm in no hurry, so I'll go have supper and come back and see what's happened. So back at the cables, they have sat for several hours with oil in these little, what used to be sort of funnels. Actually, I went in and had supper and came back out, put a little more oil in them, in the Play-Doh funnels, and let the machine sit overnight with oil in the end of the cable. So I'm going to take the Play-Doh off and dispose of it. And I'll cut all these wire ties off here. Try not to cut the wires, of course, the cables. One off the adjuster there. I guess these could come off like that. Like so. Dispose of them. And we'll put them back in the reverse of removal. So that means we'll put the throttle cable in first. So we'll remove the top ring, top disc, and we'll make sure we don't get the cables all knotted up here. So thread the adjuster, making sure we go through the top ring. Thread the adjuster in, and this is how the throttle, the idle speed is set, is by moving this adjuster up and down. So we'll put the adjuster in about, I think, where it was, which is about halfway. Now, to put the throttle slide back on, we have to put the spring on the cable, and then we want to put the end of the cable beside this opening here, and put the cable here, so that the spring goes down here, with the end of the cable going down beside it, so it can go through, the end of the cable can go through the larger hole, and then it can come out and go over to the smaller hole, and then we release pressure on it so that the spring holds the end of the cable in the smaller hole. So we want as much cable available as we do this, so we want to put the spring on. And to make this even more of a puzzle, try to keep the choke slide in the opening for it in the throttle slide. So pull the spring back on the cable, put the end of it beside where we want the spring to go, and so the end of the cable is beside the opening that the spring is in. And then as we hold the cables and push the throttle slide up the cables, the end there, the end of the cable is out and it's in the correct hole. There, that was actually relatively easy. So now we can put this back in. This kerf in the throttle slide matches up with the indexing pin in the carburetor, so it only goes in one way, and the main needle has to go into the main tube. So hopefully there we'll just get that to start, so it's down in. And then we also want the tongue in the top disc to key into the body and the carburetor. We want to make sure we start the top ring straight. We don't want to cross thread it. And just snug it up and tight. And we test our work. There, the cable seems to be working a little better. Okay, so that's one cable back in. We'll get parts for the other cable. Other items we took off the items we took off the clutch cable are the sleeve spacer and this brass spacer adjuster. It's threaded, so in some cables it's an adjuster. It doesn't fit this cable. As I said, this cable's a little different than any other clutch cable on the other Penguins I've got. And before we install the cable, we're just going to check the play on the clutch lever. There should be an amount of free play between the lever and the cover, and there is, so that tells us, having the free play there lets us know that the clutch, there's no pressure on the clutch trying to hold it in a released position, so the clutch is fully engaged, so it shouldn't slip because there's still tension on it. So what we want to do, we have to put this spacer on first on this machine, and the adjusters, lock nuts are backed off, so hole in the case and push the end of the cable through, and then this end of the cable has to be guided into the end of the lever, and that might take some I don't know, it's going to be fairly straightforward. So there the cable is laying in the cut in the end of the lever, so if I pull it back it's drawn into the recess it fits in. Now I'm going to just take some of the oil off my hands, because now I have to pull on the cable so that I can fit this spacer in place. So there we have that spacer, and the end of that spacer fits in the hole in the case, and now we want to adjust this cable so that there's so that spacer stays on, and there's a little bit of play in the cable, in the outer cable, for the same reason as we wanted play in the cable, or in the lever here. So then we know cable isn't holding the clutch. And there is some play in that cable. I'm just going to set the lock nuts loosely together with my hands, and I'm going to take it for a drive and see if the cable's going to work. It isn't as free as it could be. I'm hoping as I drive it, the oil that's in there will work into the area that's where the issue is. It's probably rust caused by water in the low spot in the cable, which is right near the hand lever, and as I work it here it actually seems to be freeing up. So that's the cable's back in. After I drive it a bit and see if the cable's going to work a little better, I'll double check this. And that's a little tight there. Double check my adjustment here and tighten those lock nuts if all is good. And then I think we still have a shift issue to. Yes, we have some. This shifter is very stiff, and it does not seem to. I can see the pivot here at the shift lever on the engine, and it's moving freely. So it's either the rod in the end of the shifter at the front, or the pivot of the shifter at the front. hopefully I can get some lubrication down into that without tearing it apart. So I'm going to take this for a drive and see what happens. So I've taken the Penguin for a little drive, and the throttle cable seems to be working fine. The clutch cable seems to be working much better. The issue I'm having now is the shifter is very stiff. This chrome piece here is a shifter from another machine, and because it's hard to see on the machine, I'll just show you on this one. There are two pivot points. One here, that's where the handle pivots as you lift and lower it, and that I can, when I look down in the hole in the seats, I can wiggle the lever back and forth a little bit this way. I can see the pin that goes through that moving freely, so that's easy to lubricate, so I'm going to definitely lubricate that. But the only thing I can't see is this joint down below, and I'm sure that is where the stiffness is, because of course it's the one that needs to be lubricated, because it is the hardest one to lubricate. And it's also low enough in the machine, if the machine sits outside and fills with water, like this machine probably has, that's going to be underwater and it's going to corrode. So I'm going to lubricate that pivot and lubricate this pivot using the flashlight and the little tube on a spray can of penetrating oil, and get oil down on this as well as I can, and then drive it around some more and see if I can get that to free up. After spraying the pivot points with some penetrating oil and driving it around a bit so that I work the shifter and the vibrations from the engine, etc., maybe help work the penetrating oil in, the shifter now returns to the center position. Now this is just moving it not to actually engage a gear, but this is like the center range, I guess, of the shifter, so it is returning to center when it's lifted up. Now if I push it down though, it doesn't come up. It should be there, so it's not quite freed up enough yet to come back up. The spring would have to overcome the weight of the lever to lift it up, of course. Actually, I think it is getting better. I'll let the penetrating oil seep into it, because what I'm avoiding doing is pulling that shifter out of there. So to pull it out, of course, I'd have to take the clutch lever and the choke control off. And there are 3 studs in the front of the battery box here that I don't know if you can see, but they're pretty corroded. So I'd be afraid of them twisting off, which wouldn't be a big deal. They're 1/4-inch bolts that are welded into the U-shaped bracket that holds the shifter, so I'm sure I could repair them if need be, but this is, I guess, the lazy man's way to do it. I just sprayed the pivot points, and I'll see if I can show you the pivot points here. Pulled the remnants of the shifter boot out of the way. Now, right here, if I can show you, right there, now, hard to show you in this light with the camera that doesn't have the flashlight up. There's the upper pivot point, and actually if you look down in here on your own machine with a light, you can actually see the rod. The rod goes through from the passenger side into the driver's side, so it goes in from the passenger side and it's got a bend in it. So the part that goes back to the engine is on the passenger side. So what I did was I just sprayed the upper pivot point everywhere I could see an opening, between the pin and the pivot and the bracket, and between the pin and the shifter, on both sides, on the top. And then I just sprayed the rod where I could see it coming through the shifter at the bottom. And that, as I demonstrated, does seem to have freed it up somewhat. And hopefully it'll sit here and the penetrating oil will hopefully soak in a little better, and this will improve. But anyway, the clutch adjustment is the replay in the clutch cable, as we can see here, and it does return on its own. So the clutch is freed up, and the throttle, when I was driving it, the throttle was working fine, so the lubrication on it worked. So, other than a clean up and whatever else I feel like fixing on this Penguin, or improving, I guess, yeah, I should be able to run and drive this around. So that's one in the running lineup.